Welcome back. I'm Vanessa and this is Have Curves Will Sew. This is part 3 in the fit series that I started with the Knit Essentials pattern. I'll put a picture right there. So I just wanted to give you a little recap of what we covered so far and an introduction to what we're going to go through today. So in the first video, and all the videos are going to be linked below or above or both. The first video we walked through the pattern itself and we kind of went over all the supplies that we're going to need to move forward. And then in the last video we took our measurements and then traced out our pattern. And in this video we're going to use our measurements to make flat pattern adjustments if necessary to the pattern. I'm going to cover a full bust adjustment on a knit and a bicep adjustment. We're going to make a little tweak to the waistline on the bodice, both front and back, and off camera I did some alterations to the skirt, but I'll tell you a little bit about that. It was a very quick alteration, so I didn't think it needed to be covered in the video. I wanted to keep it as short as possible. There's a lot of detail that I will go into. Alright, so again, we're going to cover flat pattern alterations, a full bust on a knit, and a bicep alteration. Alright, so let's get started. Alright, let's quickly go over the supplies that we'll need to do our alterations. First off, we'll need our pattern pieces that we're going to alter. We'll need some rulers. I have a curved ruler, a grid ruler, and I also have a tape measure. We'll need a pencil, some tape. I use washi tape because it's nice and low tack, but you can use any kind of tape. I have an eraser just in case. Woo. Paper scissors, scraps of paper. These were left over from when we cut out our pattern. You'll also need your measurements. So if you're following along with the Knit Essentials pattern, there is on page 11 a chart that you could have wrote your measurements down on. I also have a download on the website you can go and get. I keep mine in a bullet journal, so make sure that we have those. So I've gone ahead and made notations on what kind of adjustments I'm going to be doing just to make this a little quicker. We're going to let's start with our sleeve. Let's set this off a little bit. So I have a mark right here on my pattern. This mark indicates where the fullest part of my arm is. And I find that by measuring down from my shoulder to where that fullness is. And then I measure down from the seam line to that point. And then I got the width. I measured the width between the seam lines on both sides at this level. And I wrote that down. So the pattern itself was 16.25 and I am 19. So I'm going to need 2.75, so 2 3/4 inch bicep adjustment. Also, on the top, we're not going to worry about the back for now, but the top, I found where my bust point is. So this is the fullest point. This is the fullest point of my body. To find this, what I did was I just placed the pattern against myself with the seam line at my shoulder and center front, and I marked the fullest point of my bust. This is going to tell us where we need our alterations to be. And we're going to start with this. So again, I did my measurements on here. So I'm 50, the pattern is 46, which is a 4 inch difference. But because this is a pattern, so there's going to be 2 of them, we're actually going to divide that number by 2, which gives us 2 inches. So we're going to do a 2 inch estimate. Because this is a knit, we are going to do a little bit of a different type of alteration. So I just take my ruler and I make sure it's nice and straight. I use the lines on my table, but you can use the ends of your table, or you can draw a line this direction and that direction. And I'm just going to draw a line across here. So that's where I want most of my width to be, or my adjustment to be. You will notice on this pattern that there's kind of like a curve here. That is because this pattern is designed for an hourglass figure, so it's adding this little curve in and then it comes straight down. So what we're going to do is we're going to extend this curve down just a bit. So 2 inches here, so we're going to cut across here. So we're going to take a piece of pattern paper. This one's quite a bit wider than I need, so I'm just going to cut it down a bit. Okay, we're going to start by taping the top of the bodice to the paper. Okay, so we're going to draw a line 2 inches down from there. And I also like to extend center front down, because when we put this piece back in, we need to make sure that center front okay. And then I'm just going to true this up at center front. Too long too, so I'm just going to snip this off. Now, I'm going to add a little bit more paper there. So I said before we're going to kind of extend this bubble. So I'm just going to take it from here and just kind of kick it out. Just kind of freehanding this, extending this bubble. Right, and then just cut it off. So I just realized my curve didn't go up high enough, so I just smoothed it out there. So just to make sure that it's nice and flat, I'm going to tape it down in the back as well. So I've kind of bumped it out just a little bit here. Not too much. Don't do more than 1 inch. Make sure you can see that on the camera. And then just to simplify things, I want to redraw my seam line, just so I don't get confused. Remember, these are 1/4 inch seam lines. I've been noting them with a red marker just so I can see what I'm doing. Okay, so that's it for the full bust adjustment. Now you might notice that we have a side seam that is 2 inches longer than our back. And you can prove that when you put them together and you walk it up your seam allowance, you'll notice there's this extra 2 inches. Now obviously now our pieces don't fit together, so we need to accommodate for that. Now you could slice this and lower it by 2 inches, but because this is a knit and we don't need those 2 inches in the back, just in the front, what we'll do is when we sew this together, we'll ease this 2 inches in to the sides. If you do any more than 2 inches in here, you may need to do some length on the bodice itself, on the back bodice as well. But 2 inches, you should be able to ease that in. And we can either use gathering or stretch the fabric. You can only do this when it's a knit. You can't do this with a woven garment, but since we're working on a knit, this is going to work. The other adjustment we need to make both to the front and the back is we need 1 inch at the waist to mimic the inch that we need for our skirt, which I'll show you. So I went ahead off camera and adjusted the skirt because I only needed 1 inch, and it's a very straightforward adjustment. So I drew a line from the waist down to the hem, cut it apart, and did just like I did on the top where I spread it. I marked on a piece of paper the 1 inch and taped it down to the 2 sides so they came back together. And I did it between the notches. I could have done it at the side seam, but I didn't want to redraw my curve, so this just made it a lot easier. Now, on the bodice, we obviously don't need that the whole way through. We just need it down at the waist. You know, I think the easiest way to do this is to add it onto our side seams, and then we're going to have to move our notch. So we'll just take a piece of scratch paper. Probably only need about a half of this because we're only going to add an inch. So we'll just tape this here. Take our ruler and we'll just mark 1 inch from the side seam. So we only need this at the waist itself. So we're going to taper it to our regular side seam and make it gradual. Don't go straight up and down. So then we'll cut that off. So just like that. And we have a little. And again, we're going to redraw our seam line just so that it's clear where we're sewing. We're going to repeat that onto the back. And because we put this on the side seam instead of in between the darts, we need to move our dart over that 1 inch, or not our dart, but our notch over 1 inch. And I just take from the center of that notch. So now if we take the back bodice and the back skirt, just to check that our notches are in the same place. I went a little too far, so I'm just going to redraw it. And we'll do that with the front as well. So now our front and our back are done, and our arm is next. So like I said, I marked from the seam line down where the fullest part of my arm is 8 inches. And we're going to extend that line across. And I like to get it as straight as possible. We draw that across. We're also going to draw a line from the center, down the center of the sleeve itself. I have this crease from when I made this pattern piece, so I'm just going to trace that. Okay, so now we have an X on our sleeve. So we need to put the width that we need here. So when I measured, I needed 2 3/4 inch. So we're going to slice the sleeve up this way and across this way, leaving hinges on the side seams and at the seam line at the top of the sleeve cap. I'm doing this on the full sleeve. It will also adjust the half sleeve. So if we do a half and short sleeve or a 3/4 inch sleeve, we will have that adjustment for all 3 lengths. And then just snip to the seam line, but don't go through the seam line. So you create a hinge, and you can do that on the side seams as well. If you're using, this is Swedish tracing paper, so it's pretty stiff. It doesn't tear very easy, but if you're using paper, you want to make sure to put a piece of tape right there, and that tape will help keep it from. Okay, so now you have a piece like this. It's all long. And we're going to take a piece of paper, the length of our sleeve, and we're going to make a mark that is 2 3/4 wide. So this is 3 inches wide. So of course we want it straight. So 2 3/4. Just back it up 1/4 inch and trace on the other side. And this should extend on the whole piece. Okay, now that we have that, we're going to set this in the middle. It helps, let me move that out of the way, it helps to tape this down just so it doesn't shift as we're making our adjustment. So what we're going to do is we're going to spread the thinner paper that you have, the curlier it gets. If you're having issues, you can iron it. I just kind of threw it off the table a little bit so it got kind of twisted. Okay, so what we want to do is we want to spread it so that at that mark that we made, that is where we want it to be the widest. So I usually take the top piece and I grab some pattern weights. So if you have pattern weights, this kind of helps with this. I put one at the top just to keep that there, but I can still move it. It just doesn't fly all over the place. So I want here to be this wide. So I put a weight here and I put a weight here. And you want to make sure that your pattern is completely flat. So no bunching at the corners here, no bunching up there. So the bottom part will overlap. And you want to make sure it's at that 8 as you move this around and make sure it's nice and flat. So nice and flat. And then you'll notice our sleeve down at the bottom is a little wonky, so we're going to fix that. And this will overlap. I don't need that width down here at the bottom because my wrists are kind of narrow. So I want to make sure that these two pieces match up. Again, another pattern weight to hold that down. And that bunched up here, so we want to make sure that we're re-smoothing this pattern out. We're keeping that top at the same place. The smoothing is happening on the bottom when it's coming up and overlapping. Now we've got this all smooth, we need to tape it down. Keeping it nice and flat. If your paper is curling, like mine is right here, just make sure you're holding it down when you're putting your tape in, so you're keeping it nice and straight. You might notice that the sleeve cap has kind of spread out. One thing to note is that it hasn't changed length, it is only changed the shape. So our sleeve cap has changed shape, but it hasn't changed length. We will check to make sure that it still fits into our arm's eye, but just know that as long as it's traveling the same amount of distance, you should be fine. So let's finish taping this all up. Okay, now that we have it all taped down, you might notice that it's gotten a little shorter up here. And what I do is I just take my ruler and I go from corner to corner and I just draw a line. And then I tape that edge down too. And that's our new sleeve hem. Now is also a good time to make sure that your sleeve is long enough and to redraw your grain line. So your hem should be straight, so you want to use that as a guide with your ruler. And I have my table as well. And redraw your grain line. And then with the tape measure, I just want to make sure. I have issues with sleeves being too long. So again, from the seam line to the seam line, 22.5. And if you check your arm length, I'm 22, and that's 22.5. I'm not going to worry about it too much. It's only ½ an inch. And I tend to roll my sleeves up anyways. So we should be good there. At this time, I'm going to mark my preferred short sleeve and 3/4 length sleeve mark as well. And these are slightly curved, so I'm just going to... I like my short sleeve just a little bit shorter, or a little bit longer than this pattern has it. It's just a very slight curve. And the 3/4 length will be straight. And then I just make a note. That way, if I decide to make the short sleeve version of this top, I can just trace off this pattern with the adjustment, and I don't have to make the adjustment again. Same with the 3/4 length. If I decide to do a 3/4 length, I just trace it off to here, and I don't have to worry about adjusting it anymore. So the next step is to make sure that your sleeve cap should be 1 inch to 1.5 inches longer than your bodice. So we're going to measure that just to make sure that everything's okay with our sleeve. And again, you're going to measure at the seam lines, not including the seam allowance. And I just walk the tape up it. Alternatively, you can walk the pattern pieces together like we did the front and the back. So I'm just going to make a note, 22.25. Grab my bodice pieces. about 21, so it's in that inch range. Your sleeve cap should always be longer than your arm size. So we're good there. And that completes our alterations. If you have any questions about them, please leave them in the comments below and I will address anything that I missed or clarify anything that was unclear. Again, this is the first time I'm doing this, so I just want to make sure that we're getting the message across and everything is clear. So we've done the front and the back bodice, and we'll ease this together when we go to sew it. And the sleeve, and remember it's okay if this is a different shape as long as the length is 1 inch to 1.5 inches longer than the arm's eye of the bodice, front and back combined, which ours is. We made sure our notches match up for our skirt, and we've increased the inch. I increased 1 inch on my skirt. So you'll follow along with those principles on the alterations that you need to do. Be sure you're checking your body measurements against the pattern measurements. And don't forget about the ease. So if you need a little bit more ease or a little bit less, be sure to adjust that. I think there's very minimal ease, probably less than 1 inch on this garment because it is a knit and knits will stretch. So you don't want to get too little ease or too much ease. All right, so next time we are going to cut out our pattern and sew up our garment. Okay, well, I hope that was helpful. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments below and I'll be sure to answer anything that I didn't cover in this video. Again, this is the very first time I've ever done a series like this, so I'm trying to get your feedback on what's working well and what I can improve upon. So anything that you have to comment about below, I will be sure to address if I can. And then also, if you did like the video, please give me a thumbs up. If you have subscribed to the channel, thank you very much. If not, be sure to hit that subscribe button and don't forget to sign up for notifications so you can know when all the videos come up. We have 2 more videos in this series with this pattern. Next up in the series, we're going to sew up our muslin. If you're following along with the Knit Essentials pattern, you may have noticed that it says to sew the garment with wrong sides together so that seam allowances are on the outside. And since we are making a wearable muslin as opposed to a fit muslin, we are going to sew it up with our seam allowances on the inside, just like you normally would, except we are going to use a basting stitch. I will walk you through all of that in the next video. And then the final video in the series is going to be on the variations that the pattern has. So as you know that you can make a basic t-shirt. We're starting with a t-shirt dress, but you can turn that into a t-shirt either with a short sleeve, a long sleeve, or 3/4 length sleeve. There are 3 neckline variations, or 2 neckline variations plus a tank top variation that's like a camisole. It's got the skinny straps. And then there's also the camisole with the camisole tunic or tank tunic with the woven and the knit. And then 2 skirts, so a maxi and then a knee length or mini skirt that we can make with this pattern as well. So we'll cover that in the final video. Alright, so thanks again for watching, and until next time, happy sewing.